Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ventures Podcast. This episode with Alex Zub and Spencer Graham is packed full of very practical logistics about how to operate a DAO. In fact, in this episode, Spencer shares his screen. So I know most of you listen, but if you want to pop on and watch what he's sharing, he goes into the dashboard for Raid Guild and shows the treasury, shows how proposals happen, shows the different mechanisms by which the nitty-gritty operations happen within Raid Guild. Now, Raid Guild is a services DAO, professional services DAO that does Web3 development, and it's over 100 members now, and he sort of shows you how that process works. If you're not able to watch, that's totally fine. I think you can get the gist of it just here on audio. But I'm just delighted that we're able to capture this conversation and share it with you all, because I know a lot of people, and myself included, are highly interested about the practical details about how DAOs work, what the incentive structures are, and how it wraps and interfaces with jurisdictions, tax, legal issues, etc., etc. We get into all of that. I even ask about compensation, long-term economic compensation incentives for DAO participants. There's this new concept called Yeeting, Y-E-E-T, where now these DAOs can just very quickly raise funds and provide all kinds of forms of security and assurance for the people that put money into the DAOs and more. Anyway, you can tell that I'm super excited about this. If you are watching, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. But like I mentioned, this episode definitely has a good amount of screen sharing on it. So if you're listening, you can also watch. You can just click the link in the show notes or visit wclittle.com. There I'll have more extensive show notes, plenty of different things that we covered today. And yeah, that's it. I'm excited to dive right in. Please enjoy this conversation with Spencer Graham and Alex Zub. All right, Alex, Spencer, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Really, really great to have you back, Spencer. I'll refer listeners and watchers to the show notes for previous episodes that Spencer has been on. But the quick tee up for this conversation is that Alex reached out and just had a bunch of questions about Raid Guild, about Moloch DAOs, about DAOHaus, about what's up with this space, how to get involved, how to participate. And we had the idea of, why don't we just record a podcast episode about it, because there are definitely going to be others curious about these same set of questions. So thank you, Alex, for being willing to be on the show. Thank you again, Spencer, for being willing to share some wisdom. So why don't we just start with Alex? Would you mind just doing a quick introduction about yourself, and we'll go from there?
Sure. Well, first, excited to be here. I've been managing projects and software development teams for a little over a decade. My background, I'm a full stack engineer. I've not been coding for money for many years now, myself, outside of hobby projects and just dabbling here and there. But I've been more and more interested in Web3 as a whole space in general, and some specifics around things like DAOs, and just in general how the way you work and the way people get together and cooperate changes. So Raid Guild, like, I was always in software development agencies, so that's kind of my industry. I've in my career, I've never worked at a product company, so like super deep in the agency industry now, looking at something like Raid Guild, a little bit of kind of breaks your brain a little bit in reading through the handbook and some Twitter accounts of the people who are involved in the specific DAO, and it's all fascinating. Like, super curious about how those things work. I'm really curious how they work from kind of both sides, from the participant side, possibly from like a client side, because it seems to be so different from how the traditional agency client relationship gets set up and how kind of a traditional teams get formed within the agency and so on. So yeah, I don't really know where to start. Maybe
Yeah.
it's one of you guys or can kind of give a just a general overview. I have a bunch of questions. I have a list of questions in front of me. They're kind of specific. But yeah, this is super fascinating to me. So I'm going to have a lot of maybe really dumb questions too.
All right. Well, that's a beautiful tee up for you, Spencer. Maybe tell us the very quick background. And then what is Raid Guild? What is this? What are DAOs? What's this Moloch DAO thing? That might be a good place to start.
Okay. To start. All right. So maybe we can start with, I'm not going to, yeah, let's start with what is a DAO. This will be like way too short of an introduction to that, but a DAO is, oh God, I can't even do it because I've been thinking about this for too long and it's too complicated in my head. But a simple one way that people think about DAOs, like to describe them, is like a group chat with a bank account is one way to describe it. I think that does a decent job of describing kind of sometimes what it feels like to be in a DAO. But I think from a work perspective, I think probably a better description is basically like a digital native cooperative, where everybody that is in the organization shares in ownership and power over the organization, as well as the kind of behaviors and resources and assets that it has. And what that tends to create is a feeling of really strong autonomy for those individual people that are part of the DAO, that are members of the DAO. I think there's many types of DAOs. There's many frameworks for how to create a DAO or structure a DAO. One that I am particularly partial to is called the moloch-DAO framework. And it's very, very simple in a couple different ways. Basically, the membership is defined in a moloch DAO is defined by what we call shares, much like in an LLC or something like that. And those shares are non-transferable, and any individual member can have, an arbitrary number of shares. In reality, it's not going to be arbitrary. It's going to be a proportion to something like the amount that you've contributed, or maybe the amount of money that you contributed into the DAO's treasury. But you could have 1 share, you could have 10 shares, somebody else could have 100 shares. And those shares represent both your voting weight on decisions and actions that the DAO takes collectively in the form of proposals, as well as they represent an economic claim proportional on the assets that are inside of the DAO's treasury. And it's that economic claim that we call the rage quit power. So basically, if I am a member of a DAO and I have 10 shares, and there's a few other people and there's a total of 100 shares, that means I have 10% of the total shares, which means that if I at any point want to leave the DAO, I can do so, and I can rage quit, which essentially means I'm redeeming or burning my shares in return for, in this case, 10% of the assets, the tokens, the currencies that are inside the DAO treasury. That is a really powerful concept. One way in which it's really powerful is that it creates this almost like duality of a property rights duality. So I still maintain full custody and full control, property rights over the tokens that I put into the DAO treasury. But at the same time, because I can rage quit them, but at the same time, they're available for the DAO as a group to use in pursuit of the DAO's goals. So they're both like public goods and private goods in that sense, or privately held goods or publicly held goods at the same time. So a Moloch DAO is how Raid Guild is structured. And it fits quite well with the concept of a of what is essentially a Web3 dev shop structured as a cooperative and a DAO. And we all kind of co-own the agency or the guild. And to join, all of us have put in a little bit of money, about $500 or 500 DAI to start. And that is kind of the seed by which we pay for things in ways to improve the guild. And then as clients come in the door and they ask us to do things for them, and they pay us for that, then the people who worked on those projects get 90% of what the client pays, and then 10% goes into the DAO treasury and is therefore effectively split amongst all the other members. So that's the basics. There's a lot of stuff, and we've been growing and expanding and figuring out how to do so. So there's a lot of interesting things that we've been working on and trying to figure out. But hopefully that's a decent overview.
No, this is awesome. This is fascinating to me. Is there a founder? Is there like a one person who started the whole thing, but then kind of did not retain any kind of real full control over the thing, and all got distributed at some point? Like how did it start? Do you know the story? Were you involved?
Yeah, so I was not there at the beginning, but there was a few founders who were part of a different DAO called Metacartel, and they had been playing around with the idea of kind of like a perpetual hackathon, where it just always would be new projects to work on and ways to jam together to build things together. And what they came up with was this concept of each project was conceptualized as a raid, and so maybe we should put together a guild to go on these raids together. And that kind of slowly turned into, okay, we can find clients to go on raids for. They'll pay us to go slay their own Web3 dragons or demons. And so when they started the DAO, they seeded it with some of their own funds. It was ETH at the time, and they gave themselves shares in the DAO, kind of in proportion to the amount of ETH that they put into the treasury. So still today, they have more shares than most other members of the DAO, which only makes sense given that a lot of their money is still in the treasury. But at this point, and I can even pull it up, and we can even look at it if we want. We can look at the.
Yeah, I saw there was a dashboard, right? You can see everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is the other thing that is really fascinating.
Everything, yeah. In a DAO, everything is, at least currently, everything is publicly visible, or at least everything of real substance in terms of the shares, the assets, and all those things. Should I share my screen?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, the most, 99.99% of people just listen to it, but this is a good excuse to send people into, look at the show notes, click on the link, and you can see what Spencer's about to share here.
All right, so let me just see if I can share my browser. All right, is that showing up for you guys?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I have gone to, this is the DAOHaus app, which is actually another project that I'm associated with. That it basically is a user interface or app for creating and participating in DAOs. And this is in particular, this is the Raid Guild. Let me pull open this so we can see a little bit more of the interface here. This is the Raid Guild DAO. This is kind of the overview. So we can see that there are, we've grown quite a bit recently. There's 137 members. And across all those members, there's about 75,000 shares, 76,000 shares. Personally, I have about 1,000 of those.
Quick question. When somebody new joins, does that create new shares?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when somebody leaves, they burn it.
It's always, exactly. So it's always non-dilutive. So that is why when we join, we put in 500 $500, and we get 100 shares to start. So over time, you can see I have 1,000 shares. Over time, there are mechanisms by which individual members can earn more shares, but they are pretty much always backed by DAI. We target a share value of $5 or 5 DAI per share, and we try to not go above that. That is a model that's been the way that we've worked for, I guess it's been a year and a half or so, maybe almost 2 years now. I've been around for about a year and a half at Raid Guild. I think the whole thing's been around for about 2 years. And that's been the model of trying to target a stable share price so that we're not taking profits from the revenue that the guild brings in. Instead, we're recycling those funds to improve what we do internally, but then also to build products and tools that anybody can use. That model might be changing in the future as we kind of figure out the right way to scale and the right way to kind of expand the impact that we can have. But that's basically the way it works currently. So this is the overview. We can see what's in the bank if we want, but probably more interesting is to see the list of members. So as some of this stuff loads, we'll get some more information on these, more readable information on these member names, although maybe something is a little bit slow to load right now, but you can just see addresses here. And you can see that some people have like a significant number of shares here. I don't know exactly if this is, but these are most likely 3 of the original founders. Mm-hmm. And then we can kind of scroll down and see the distribution. But even if we look at this person, that's Deacon, he has, if we go to his profile, he has only 10% governance power. So there's no way that he can swing a vote unilaterally one way or the other. So even though he started out by putting in a lot of the funds and therefore got a lot of the shares, at this point, his power is quite diminished as an individual.
Could he, if he wanted to sell, let's say half of his shares, is there such thing as a partial rage quit?
Yeah. You can rage quit shares individually or in groups. So he could rage quit 1 share if he wanted to.
Oh, cool. Okay. That leads into the question that I asked. We'll leave that more toward the end, because I definitely want to cover liquidity incentives for founders, and I want to cover, now I just saw this concept of yeeting, if I'm saying that right.
Yep.
That's super cool as well. But I don't want to.
We can talk about that. Yeah, we can talk about that too.
Okay, let's make sure before we end to talk about those 2 things. But Alex, I'll hand it back to you. Let's hit some more of your questions.
I love this. I feel like I have a lot of questions that we will not have enough time to cover. So I'm going to try to choose those that are going to be most relevant to, everybody listening to this.
Sure.
So everybody gets voting rights. What are all the things that people get to put proposals on? What's the majority of things?
Yeah, so we can look at the proposals right here. The majority of what we tend to, so there's a few main things, and I guess we can sort of see them here. So one is, this one's not as common in Raid Guild. Well, I don't know. Okay, there's a bunch of things that we vote on, or that we have to decide on and take action on as a guild. So one of those things is new members. There's actually a fairly extensive process for how new members join the guild, but the way they officially join the guild in terms of becoming a member of the DAO is by creating a membership proposal. And this is where they would they would add their 500 DAI and receive their 100 shares. And they would title things appropriately and give some information here. In reality, we have the process of adding a new member requires a champion that is an existing member of the guild to bring them in, bring in a new member. We could talk about that at some other time. so new member proposals is one way. You could, so if you earn, every time you earn money from a project, whether that's a client or an internal project, you can actually request additional shares backed by up to 20% of what you earned from the client. So that would be basically similar to another membership proposal, but for additional shares. Let's see, there are some other things that we typically do. So funding proposal, this would be if we want to, this would be deciding to spend some of our treasury on building something internal, or maybe even building something that could be used externally. So we have a system. One example of that is we have a system called Smart Escrow, which is how clients pay us. We built that internally, and there was a proposal. Let's see, can I even? Oh no, we don't have searching by title yet. But there was a proposal to fund that. This is another. We call those internal projects RIPs, Raid Guild Improvement Proposals. This is another RIP that was requesting not much money, but just 1,000 DAI to pay for updating the design system for this particular tool that we had built before.
So can we use this as an example? Okay, so that's a member of the guild making a proposal saying, and I see the recipient, so there's a developer who would get compensated 1,000 DAI to get this thing implemented. Is that what it is?
Basically, yeah. This, I don't know if this is an existing member. I don't know. I don't remember what this address is. This could be another. This could even be another DAO. This could be like a multi-sig that several developers or several what we call raiders, members of the guild, are members of, and that's how they're organizing their little project. But yeah, this is a member of the DAO requesting 1,000 DAI go to this recipient for this project.
So how does it get enforced? Like, does the payment go out first, and then there's the, you're kind of hoping that this developer is going to do the job?
In this case, yes. So typically with internal projects, there's a high, well, because of the way that membership works, there's a high degree of trust amongst all the members. Not only can you rage quit your funds if you disagree with what somebody else is doing, there's also an ability to kick out a member. So I don't think we've had to do this very often. Maybe just once. When there was a member who was doing things that the guild very much did not agree with, they got guild kicked and they were not a member anymore. But the threat of this is quite strong to make sure that, in addition to all the social reasons to not be an asshole, the threat of this is quite strong as well. So internally, there's a high degree of trust. But when clients pay us, that smart escrow thing that I was talking about, that is us basically saying, doing two things. One, giving our clients a way to pay us without fully trusting us to deliver if they're paying up front, and us to make sure that they actually have the money to pay us before we start work for them.
That's great. I love that. I've been in a lot of situations where clients wouldn't have the money or wouldn't want to prepay, and then they would have the trouble to pay.
So often, I don't have one of these. Okay, but Smart Escrow is based on this, which is Smart Invoice. Hang on. Let's look at. Okay, so these are just some examples. So so Smart Escrow is like an internal Raid Guild version of Smart Invoice, which we also built. It has some customizations, but the core concept is basically the same. So you can imagine this might be this is an invoice that we send our client upfront before the project ever starts. And it's basically saying we've defined 3 payment milestones. So we're going to kind of do 3 chunks of work. And the first chunk is worth 300 test currency. Let's call it dollars. Next one is worth 5, and the next one is worth almost 600. So before we even begin on the first one, the client deposits 300. And once they deposit that into escrow, then we know that the money exists and we can continue and start working. Once we do that, though, and then we finish the milestone, we say, hey, client, we finished. Now it's time for you to release those funds to us so that we can receive them and use them in the way that we need. So the client, if they agree, they would release that $300 to us. And 10% would automatically go into the Raid Guild treasury. And then the 90% would come to the individuals that had worked on the project, or at least on that milestone. Then to get to the next milestone, the client would have to deposit again, and we repeat the process. If there's at any point a dispute, whether the client thinks we didn't deliver appropriately or we did something wrong, or we think that we did deliver and the client is not paying us as they should, not releasing funds to us, we can initiate a dispute with an arbitrator, which in this case is an entity called another DAO called LexDAO. And they would sort of adjudicate that dispute and make a decision about which party should get the funds or how to split the funds between the 2 parties.
So this is fascinating. Like it's basically a court on chain.
Yeah, LexDAO in this case kind of acts as like a court in a sense.
Yeah.
There are other on-chain courts, like Kleros is one of them.
Yeah, they're called Decentralized Dispute Resolution Services.
Yeah, so there's Kleros Court, which is a bunch of individuals who are basically like participating in this process. I guess I'm on Rickety, so I need to be on whatever. But there can be cases, and they kind of get selected as jurors, and they can vote. There's some game theory to consider there, so it may not work for all purposes. But we're sort of using like a simplified version of that, where another DAO acts as the judge in a sense.
Anybody can go use smartinvoice.xyz?
Yes, that is publicly available.
That's really cool. Kudos to you all. That's super impressive.
It is really awesome. Wow. So, okay, let's. What I'm seeing is the project is milestone based. Is that the only form in which the Raid Guild provides services, or is there also like hourly thing?
We have, for the most part, we do kind of like the client comes to us with a problem they want solved, something they want built or created or done. We help them spec it out, or maybe they already have a spec, and then we do it in a series of milestones. That's the most common type of raid that we go on for clients. But we do have, I think, maybe more than one, but we definitely have one client that pays us basically as a retainer. We're kind of on retainer for that client. And we basically, they send us some amount of money every month, and then they kind of keep a list of ongoing tasks or things they want us to do for them.
So that's really interesting. When you look at the traditional agency space, typically the bigger the agency, well, it really depends. So different agencies are going to do it differently, but there is a lot of challenges in software development that comes with fixed bid, fixed scope projects. Like, as you can imagine, like we're all trying to be agile. Businesses are trying to be agile. The thing where, you know, an agency signs up to deliver a project with some scope within, let's say, 6 months, and here's a big chunk of money, more often than not, it's going to be a disaster. Just because if you take big enough chunk of work, you're not really, like, there's a lot of risks, there's a lot of unknowns. As you go through the project, things change, people change their minds, the more the environment change, the certain features that they wanted at the beginning, they may not want anymore. They may not make sense. When developers get into things, they're like, okay, this thing doesn't really make sense. Like we need to do it differently, but differently from how we imagined we're gonna do it on day one. I'm curious, like how much of that is even a problem within what you've experienced. Spencer, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. I don't think anything that you said is different for Raid Guild versus a more traditionally organized agency. All those challenges, which are like fundamental challenges of like product development and software development, basically exist. So we deal with all of those as well. We try to stay, so like we do define projects in terms of milestones, but we also try to stay flexible. One of the reasons that this is nice here is that a client doesn't have to deposit everything up front. They can deposit as we go. So if we realize that, oh shoot, we actually like all of us were thinking about this in not quite the right way, we need to go back and either change that, or that changes the scope or the design of something forward looking, we can modify this.
Oh, you can. Cool.
Well, we can modify this one, but we could just stop using this one and create a new one that has the appropriate terms. So we need to be flexible. That is absolutely true. One of the I guess the advantages that we have or other service DAOs that are organized in similar ways as us have is that all of the individual co-owners of the DAO, all of the members of the guild are able to make their own decisions about what they work on. So that can help significantly in creating a sense of ownership over the project that you're working on, especially when you've been able to be involved in, as say a developer, you're able to dictate basically your rate to the client. So I think that does introduce a question of how do we have single clients interfacing with multiple individuals who are kind of their own sovereign entities. And the answer there is that we have various roles within the guild. One of those roles is called the cleric role, which is roughly equivalent to an account manager. So their job is to take incoming requests from clients and then basically act as the interface between the client and the guild. And their job is to find other members of the guild who have appropriate skills, who want to join that project and help figure out both what the client really needs and how to define that and spec it out, and also to figure out what the budget is going to be or needs to be. So those other members of the guild have a lot of say in what the budget should be for that amount of work. And when they're involved in that kind of planning, it's a lot easier for them to feel ownership over what they're doing, and it's a lot easier for them to be on board with changes and pivots and other kinds of things that somebody who was just like assigned to that project and like told what to do might be less comfortable adopting or adapting to.
Well, I'd love to hit the two topics, and then maybe if we have a little bit of time at the end for some additional questions. But number one, at long-term economic incentives for DAO participants, I shot Spencer a question this week about, is it possible to translate the shares, the non-transferable shares, at some point in the future to have some kind of way for DAO participants to take some liquidity, especially if this thing takes off? Because in traditional orgs, right, the early founders own some shares in their corporation. Those shares, as the company grows, hopefully grow in value. Very common at Series B or Series C, et cetera, for founders to have secondary sales and take some liquidity off the table for down payment on homes, et cetera. What is the mechanisms by which those early DAO participants or any DAO participants can sell their shares, especially if this thing goes up, and have ways of potentially having these shares be sold on exchanges?
So the common theme across basically all DAO stuff is flexibility and options and malleability. And the reason I say that is because there's a million ways to do that. Many of them have not been invented. Many of them have not even been understood yet. So moloch-DAO shares are, as we said before, they're non-transferable. So in some sense, they can't really serve as like financial instruments of their own or on their own. However, one, there's definitely a way to hack them into being transferable. Like you can create a separate contract that kind of wraps them and then handles things, and then that contract can issue a token. Probably not worth getting into those details. But the next version of the moloch-DAO framework is actually creating a way for a single DAO to decide whether it wants its shares to be transferable or not. And they can make that decision at any point in their life cycle. So I don't think Raid Guild will do this, but other DAOs could make the decision to say, we're going to allow members of our DAO to sell their shares to other people.
And would those shares turn into loot shares, or would they have some voting rights associated with them themselves? Or I guess it would be up to the DAO, but
yes, in the Moloch DAO framework, version 3, Moloch v3, which we also refer to as BAL, B-A-A-L. So I might say that interchangeably. In Moloch v3, both shares and loot shares can be independently turned on or off as transferable or not. So I could sell my actual full shares, or I could sell my DAO shares, my loot shares. Alex, was it clear what loot shares are? We kind of skipped over that at the beginning.
Yeah, probably.
So loot shares are basically just they're exactly like DAO, like full shares, except they don't have any governance component to them. Or sorry, they don't have any voting weight to them.
Yeah, they're non-voting shares. Yeah.
Non-voting shares, but so you still have the same economic exit or rage quit rights, and via that power, you can exert some governance power over decisions that are made via your threat to leave if you don't like a particular decision. But you cannot vote with them.
Because it's fascinating to think about, because at that point, when if a DAO decides to go ahead and allow their shares to be transferable, the peg to a specific currency would all of a sudden potentially go away, for better or worse. Because now all of a sudden the shares would have a public token price, and then that could get interesting in terms of future.
Right. So it probably makes no sense for that reason for Raid Guild to want to make our shares transferable or tradable. And the reason is that currently we target this like pretty stable value for those shares. So it doesn't, so like if I were to sell, if I were to sell my Raid Guild shares to somebody else, they would be making a pretty big bet that Raid Guild would change its mind over the way that it was targeting share value. Instead, what Raid Guild has done is we've issued a token of our own called the Raid token that is really currently more of just a token that facilitates some mechanisms internally and also with our clients. Maybe over time, though, it could grow to represent any number of things. Potentially, and there's no guarantee of this, there's no explicit plans for this, but potentially tracking the value of Raid Guild as a whole. So in you can see that some of that token here in our treasury. There's a bunch of Raid tokens that we've distributed those to our members as well as previous clients and other people that have interacted with the guild over the last year or two. And we're using those in different ways to create different mechanisms and sort of different incentive structures and different things. But
okay, so what
creating your own token is definitely one way. Like we could have done this in a way that was like meant to be much more of like, this is representing value, the value of Raid Guild, and therefore could have been a way for members to kind of profit or benefit from their previous engagement. So a separate DAO that has different goals could use their own token like this, rather than trying to make their own shares tradable. So that's what I mean by there's options. So
I mean, what else would you
shares tradable, or you could issue your own separate token. Right. Lots of different things.
Besides pegging it to governance, what else could you? I mean, because other chains, or L1s or L2s or other types of DAOs will peg it to governance, right? Or they'll peg it to utility token of some kind, right? I mean, remember 5 years ago we were all talking about the difference between utility token, governance tokens, lots of different types of tokens. I'm just curious, what off the top of your head, and you may not have an answer to it, but off the top of your head, what else could you peg a token to besides governance that the public markets would value, that the public markets would actually attribute value to?
Yeah, that's an open question, I think. But there's a few different models, but like one is sort of a token buyback kind of model, which is the economic equivalent of dividends, but it's more just like the value of each token goes up as they get bought back and burned. So the maker DAO uses that approach but there's also risk in holding the maker token. The maker token gets burned every time DAI debt is paid back, but also the maker token acts as a risk backstop for various like long tail risk events.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one model. Another one is just like you're saying, governance over the pool of assets that the DAO has, and as that pool of assets grows, or is expected to grow, the value of the token reasonably grows with it. Another one is that token is required to to complete some kind of task or be eligible for some kind of work. Typically, it's called a work token.
Oh, work token. That's it. Yeah.
That's kind of how the graph network is. Like curation is a big category in the work token model. There's a whole bunch, and there's probably ones kind of similar to what I said before, ones that have not been invented yet, and we can't even conceive of at this point. Yeah, so big area for exploration.
So the last thing, and then I'll hand it off to Alex for you to sort of close us out, is I'll just briefly, we mentioned Yeeting earlier. I saw the announcement I think just today. Yeeting, Y-E-E-T, is essentially a very quick way to allow someone to buy loot shares in a Moloch DAO via DAOHaus for the purposes of quickly fundraising something, right? So if you just want to allow people to acquire loot shares, you can open up this Yeeting possibility so that people can not go through a big formal membership proposal process, but they can just buy loot shares directly. That has all kinds of interesting implications that are very exciting for DAOs. Did I miss any nuance there, Spencer?
No, that was pretty good. I think the big implication is that it drastically lowers the barrier for these crowdfunding barrier to contribute to these crowdfunding kinds of things, where the goal is to kind of raise as much money as possible in a short amount of time in order to achieve some like big hairy goal that you can't really do individually.
Right.
The lower the barrier to contribution, the easier it is, and the more funds you're probably going to collect or raise. And the reason that barrier is low is because you have loot shares and you have immediate rage quit rights over the funds that you put in. You don't actually give up custody over your funds. So there's really very little kind of reason to not do it.
That's awesome. Okay, Alex, thank you for letting me insert those 2 talking points on this. Happy to hand it off to you for a final question or 2.
No, love it. This is again so fascinating to me. I'm always curious about on-chain projects and how they bridge the off-chain world. I'm curious if there's like an LLC that you know of that actually like, okay, we need I don't know, I'm making it up, but Adobe Creative Suite subscription for a member, like how, like we cannot buy it with DAO, with DAI. Like we probably need like an actual traditional company to do it. Or there's an off-chain company, an incorporated company comes to Raid Guild and saying, hey, I know nothing about crypto, but I need somebody to make this thing, right? Like, is there any mechanism to do any sort of transactions off-chain, or is it purely an on-chain DAO that doesn't really exist in the traditional world?
So we technically have a Delaware LLC that is kind of a wrapper around our DAO. We don't really make much use of that, with the exception of like some very basic kind of compliance and like tax things, which we're kind of working through. But to answer kind of your second question first, that one's super easy. If somebody comes to us and says, we want to pay you to do this thing, but we're not willing to do the work or learn how to pay you on chain, then we're not going to work with you.
Yeah.
Just period.
Good way to filter your clients. Yeah.
Then in terms of like expenses in the real world, typically we just handle those by like somebody will pay out of pocket and then we'll reimburse them. That doesn't work for bigger things usually, but we haven't run into any challenges with that yet.
That's cool.
Very cool. Well, we'll probably wrap it up here. I have a bunch of other questions, but nothing. I think we covered pretty much everything. All the interesting stuff.
Maybe we can post an article on Mirror or something. If you want to write up some of those questions, we can answer them sort of collectively together and get that out there. That could be kind of cool as well as an addendum.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. All right. Well, then last thing is where can people find the two of you online to continue the conversation here? Alex?
Twitter handle @AlexZub is where you can find me. Not super active, but becoming a lot more active lately.
Nice. How about you, Spencer?
Yeah, Twitter's the best place for me as well. It's the first half of my first name and the first half of my last name kind of jammed together at SPENGRAH, Spengra.
Awesome. All right. Well, Alex, Spencer, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Alex. Good to talk to you guys. See you.
Bye-bye.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it'd be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.